Hello, good evening and welcome back. And if you just tuned in, welcome to the Road to Warsaw Security Forum. My name is Florian Feyerabend and I'm the desk officer for the Western Balkans at the Konrad Adenauer Foundation in Berlin. The Konrad Adenauer Foundation is a German political foundation closely affiliated with the ruling Christian Democratic Union of Chancellor Angela Merkel. And we are delighted to be an institutional partner of the Road to Warsaw Security Forum. It is my pleasure to moderate today's last panel, the expert webinar titled Strategic Rivalry, the European Union, Russia and China in the Western Balkans. In 2017, High Representative Federica Mogherini warned that the Balkans are at the brink of becoming a chessboard for big powers. And just in September this year, during her State of the Union address, President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, stated, "The Western Balkans are part of Europe and not just a stopover on the Silk Road." So clearly, geopolitics return to the Balkans. The purpose of this panel is to discuss the strategic approaches of various external actors towards the Western Balkans by outlining and analyzing their interests, intentions, and measures. In order to do so, I would like to welcome our four distinguished speakers tonight. Let me quickly introduce them to you. With us today is Theresa Fallon. She is the founder and director of the Brussels-based Center for Russia, Europe, Asia Studies. She's a renowned expert on EU-Asia relations and China's One Belt, One Road initiative, as well as on great power competition. From 2003 to 2007, she worked in Beijing as a researcher and consultant. And prior to that, from 1998 to 2003, she was working in Moscow as the representative of a research and consulting firm. Welcome, Theresa. Our second panelist is Jeremić. He's currently the president of the Center for International Relations and Sustainable Development, a public policy think tank registered in both Belgrade and New York. Mr. Jeremić was Minister of Foreign Affairs of Serbia from 2007 to 2012. In 2012-2013, he also served as the president of the UN General Assembly. And in 2016, Mr. Jeremić ran for the office of UN Secretary General to succeed Ban Ki-moon. After 6 rounds of voting in the UN Security Council, he finished the race second in place behind Mr. Antonio Guterres. Good evening, Mr. Jeremić.
Good evening and good evening.
Joining us today is also Ambassador Stefano Stefanini. He's a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council and currently works as the Brussels Director of Project Associates, a strategic communication consultancy. Ambassador Stefanini served as a diplomatic advisor to the Italian President Giorgio Napolitano. His career also included the positions of permanent representative of Italy to NATO and deputy chief of mission of the Italian embassy in Washington, D.C. A warm welcome, Stefano. Last but certainly not least, Robert Pszczel. He's a senior officer at the public diplomacy division of the NATO headquarters. He joined the Polish Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 1990, worked on OSCE and NATO issues, was posted in Brussels, where he was member of the accession talks team and counselor at the Polish permanent mission to NATO. Since 1999, he's a member of NATO's international staff, and his experience includes a posting in Russia from 2010 to 2015 as a head of the NATO Information Office in Moscow. So before we get started, just some small housekeeping rules. I would like to encourage the audience to actively participate in the discussion by asking questions using the chat function. Please also vote in the poll on the platform. This applies for registered users. The results will be presented just right after the session. So give us a wild guess, when will the Western Balkans join the European Union? Lastly, if you're using Twitter, please also use our hashtag Road2WSF. We will now have less than half an hour for the panel discussion, and then I will open the discussion to the audience. I would also like to remind the panelists to be short and concise in their answers, and let's just get started right away with Robert. Robert, what is the strategic significance of the Western Balkans for European and Euro-Atlantic security? And connected with that, what is therefore the strategic goal of the EU and NATO for the region?
Well, I think, obviously I cannot speak for the EU in formal sense, but I don't think there are any great mysteries that, our approaches are very much the same. There is no hidden agenda to start with. I mean, we are interested, I think some quotes you already introduced. I mean, whether you for us, this is, this is not backyard, this is, courtyard, this region is of great importance both to European Union and NATO. And we are interested in, obviously, bearing in mind particularly the history of the region. I'm not saying anything original. I'm afraid in the 1990s, we're interested in peace and stability. We're interested in good neighbor relations. We are interested to see the countries, irrespective whether they want or not, join, for example, NATO, to have at their disposal, if you like, the most modern institutions, to apply the highest possible standards when it comes to a variety of areas which many countries in our respective organizations are taking almost for granted. And that is why, it's the perspective also of integration. Let's also mention this, it is important. It's, first of all, decided by, starting point is the wish of the countries in question, and we want them to be able to exercise this wish and then act on it. But as part of that relationship, which is obviously different with different countries. I mean, Serbia is a case in point, obviously, when it comes to NATO, than the others. Our interest is to have a positive agenda, both within the region and both, between, let's say, NATO and European Union and those countries. And these are the principles, this is the policy to which we stand for. Of course, real life shows that there are many obstacles. Nothing is easy, and as the saying goes, you never sort of enter the same river, but also the train is moving. So sometimes we hear, well, maybe the standards, the expectations are getting a bit higher. That is true, because lessons are being learned. But altogether, I would say, I think there is clarity on what is it that we want and how we want to go about this. We have the utmost respect for the sovereignty of the countries, for their own freely arrived decisions. And I think we are going to speak a bit about the spoilers later on.
Already brought it up, the obstacles. How do you think that Russia would fit into that picture, especially the strained relationship between the West and Russia?
It's not my job to speak for the Russians, let them speak for themselves, but we our approach is let's not be ahistorical. Certainly in 1990s, we have treated Russia as a partner, also in terms of resolving a lot of issues, particularly security issues. Let's not forget Russian soldiers were part of the first NATO big operation, IFOR and SFOR in Bosnia. In fact, even the logo of that was both in Latin, used the Latin and Cyrillic names. And there was the Dayton, then there was Kosovo. After all, the UN Security Council resolution was supported by Russia. And of course, that was then, and we have not changed our policy, but it's clear that something has changed in Russia. So I don't know, chess is a popular game in Russia, but it seems that we get an impression, let's put it this way, the Russian colleagues are often treating the region as some kind of a battleground. And unfortunately, there's quite a few examples which we could go into later, whether it's disinformation, whether it's involvement, this is the court verdict in Montenegro of Russian citizens in the unsuccessful coup d'etat, or whether it's a variety of reactions to those processes that we consider to be very positive.
Thank you, Robert. I would like now to focus on another significant but rather recently new external actor on the Western Balkans, China. And who else to ask than Theresa? So Theresa, what is the Chinese interest in the Western Balkans, and to which extent is it compatible or incompatible with a European vision for the region that we just heard about?
We heard thank you so much to the organizers. I'm very honored to be here, and a warm hello from Brussels. Last year, we saw a senior EU official announced that the EU had overestimated Russia's influence in the Balkans and underestimated China. So finally, China was on the radar for Europe, but it was perhaps even too slow to take notice. China effectively uses economic activities, both physical and digital infrastructure, to advance their political, commercial, and technological objectives in the Western Balkans. The global financial crisis in 2008, we saw China start to really invest there. Before that, they were not very active at all, and mostly in infrastructure. They're part of a broader Chinese strategy known as the Belt and Road Initiative. And I have to plug in my computer, sorry. Oh dear. So sorry about that. Okay.
Fallon Road Initiative.
It's better than my computer dying. So the 17+1 is a corridor that predates the Belt and Road Initiative, but it's a, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, it's 11 EU member states, 5 possible accession states, and it's a sub-regional grouping that China has carved out. It's quite incredible because with the addition of Greece, just last year we have the Piraeus port, and you have a land sea corridor that China actually has a lot of influence over. So China moves slowly, incrementally, but they seem to have a long-term strategic interest in the region. And you know, they're all Mackinder. They all have studied Mackinder, and they follow that line that he who controls Eastern Europe, here, Mackinder is a geostrategist from 1904, and his paper, The Geographical Pivot of History, declared the heartland theory: who rules Eastern Europe commands the heartland, who rules the heartland commands the world island, who rules the world island controls the world. And I really think Beijing is taking this very seriously, and they've been successful so far with this land-sea corridor. And they move so slowly that people don't really pay attention. It's almost like the boiling frog syndrome. So as a general rule, Beijing prefers to work bilaterally, even though they have this sub-regional grouping. They work one-on-one with the countries. And there's growing concern about debt dependence. No one wants to use the term debt diplomacy anymore, but someone from one of the lending institutions says it's the same difference. So these countries are actually, there's a great deal of concern about dependence on China's loans. So Serbia stands out head and shoulders among all the region. It receives 1/3 of Chinese loans. Also political reasons in that for their investments there. Of course, it's a destination for Chinese investment, as I just mentioned. There's also this kind of crafting of a narrative with echoes from the 1999 bombing campaign. So Xi Jinping, when he went to Belgrade, he actually went to the embassy, and they're like, we suffered with you. So it's kind of an anti-West narrative. So Serbia can turn east or west. And so I think China is trying to cultivate this narrative that we suffered together.
During the peak of the first wave of the global corona pandemic, China embarked on a mass diplomacy, which fell on quite fertile ground in many places in the Western Balkans. You already just mentioned Serbia. And emblematic for that new corona or mass diplomacy was the kissing of the Chinese flag by the president of Serbia, Aleksandar Vučić. Do you think we entered a new phase when it comes to relations between China and the region, and also the approach of China towards the region?
Well, we need to remember that President Vučić was once the Minister of Propaganda in the last Milosevic cabinet. He did embrace the flag and kissed it and made news all around the world. But what few people understood is that the EU paid for that plane. So it also signals the lack of the inability of the EU to communicate well. And so China has really pushed this narrative that we've done everything for you, and Europe wasn't present. And in fact, the opposite is quite true. So if you really dig down into the details, Europe has given far more aid to Serbia. But this narrative actually helps Serbia to use it as leverage. It's kind of a card to wave to Brussels and to the rest of the world that, if you don't help us here, China will have more influence. So in the rest of the world, mass diplomacy morphed into wolf warrior diplomacy. And we didn't see that really happen in Serbia. So it was kind of an alternative narrative.
Thank you, Theresa. After having listened to some external views on the region and the role of external actors in that region, let's bring in a perspective from the region itself. Live from Belgrade is with us Mr. Jeremić. Mr. Jeremić, you're a political opponent and well-known critic of President Aleksandar Vučić, but one could imagine that there will be very little disagreement between you and him when it comes to the assessment of the role of both Beijing and Moscow. Looking now at the bigger picture, not only focusing exclusively on Serbia, how do you assess the interests, intentions, and activities of both Russia and China in the Western Balkans?
Well, first and foremost, I could ask you, how did you come to a conclusion that I would agree with Vučić on the role of China and Russia? I am also the leader of a political party in Serbia, People's Party. It's a center-right, liberal conservative party, pro-European disposition. And I've been extremely critical of President Vučić when it comes to the key point in the context of the geopolitical future of the Balkans, so the future of the geopolitical rivalry in the Balkans. As a matter of fact, we have in Serbia ceased to be a democracy. And this is not just my subjective view. I'm talking about the assessment of external shops like the Freedom House of Washington that classify us as a hybrid regime, so no longer a democracy. For the first time since the ousting of Milosevic in the year 2000, we were relegated from the basket of free states into a partly free state. And for as long as we keep this trend, and this trend started with the rise of Mr. Vučić to the position of supreme leadership in this country, it's no longer the presidency, it's the supreme leadership, as a matter of fact, we can hardly hope to be returned back on the European track, because in the EU, you might have issues in certain parts of the European Union with democracy and institutions and the rule of law, but one thing is for sure, you would never let in a country that is not a democracy inside the EU. So I think that in the current situation where Serbia is backsliding on its path to the EU, it's getting actually further and further away from the ability to fulfill the Copenhagen criteria for accession to the European Union. This is, as a matter of fact, something that Russia and China wholeheartedly embrace. And therefore, Russia and China are great supporters and admirers of Mr. Vučić. That reflects itself, amongst other things, in the total prohibition of the Chinese and Russian diplomats in Serbia to communicate with the opposition, myself included. I had a chance to work with their diplomacy when I was foreign minister. We are no longer being invited even to the cocktail receptions. There's actually zero communication with anybody from the opposition in Serbia. The only exclusive relationship that Beijing and Moscow have is with the government. That's also to do with their general doctrine of working with states, regardless of how they function or whether or not they are democracies or not. But for the time being, the Western Balkans is stuck on its way to Europe. For as long as we are stuck, the external actors see it as a boom. And they have no reason to do anything to change this.
Some other observers would say there is some kind of like a new momentum for the European Union in the Western Balkans. We have the updated methodology. We have the recently adopted 9 billion economic and investment plan for the Western Balkans. We have the prospect of the first intergovernmental conference with Albania and North Macedonia. So there will be like a start of accession talks with 2 of those countries in the near future, let's say. So you would not agree with the notion that there is some kind of positive new momentum between the European Union and the Western Balkans?
Well, I would qualify it a little bit. I think this is potentially good news. So basically, new methodology that allows for making steps back in the accession process is certainly good news, because we are, as a matter of fact, making steps back. Promising funds, promising investment, for as long as this investment is attached to a certain criteria related to the accession path, is certainly good news. But I think that by now everybody knows that at the heart of the problem of the Western Balkans and its relation with Europe is that we basically suspended democracy, especially in Serbia, but in the rest of the region as well. So for the time being, nobody speaks loud about this. For example, Serbia is the only country in Europe except Belarus that has no opposition in the parliament. How did we get to that? It's a long story. We're going to leave for another time. But there is no opposition in the Serbian parliament. President Vučić commands like 90% majority in the parliament, and he still gets a congratulation from President Tusk for such a victory. We should perhaps think or rethink as to how to approach this situation in the coming months.
Thank you, Mr. Jeremić. We could hardly discuss the Western Balkans and geopolitics without also focusing on Another external actor, which is very close to us Europeans, the United States of America. And Stefano, during the Trump administration, the transatlantic relationship reached a low point. This crisis also had its effects on the EU-US partnership in the Western Balkans. Especially the role of Ambassador Richard Grenell was viewed very critically in most European capitals. Now, with a new incoming US administration under Joe Biden and a president who knows the region so well, what do you expect for the transatlantic partnership when it comes to the Western Balkans?
Thank you, Florian. You're asking me to talk about the elephant in the room, the incoming Biden administration. I use a literary phrase about it, great expectations, which is a dangerous position because then it is difficult to live up to them. Coming to your specific questions, Grenell is out. Merkel is in. What I mean is that as long as she's chancellor, of course. But I'll explain what I mean. Obviously, the Democrats have a special track record of engagement in the Balkans, which makes them particularly popular with some countries, not all of them. So we can expect that the transatlantic cooperation in the Balkans is back after 4 years of basically not being there in terms of cooperation. How will it play out? This is because there are basically, in my view, two options of two ways. They don't exclude each other. One is the US supporting the EU process. The other is which takes a more direct engagement by the US, is through the Quint and or the Berlin process. Obviously, the EU is if I can use the word, is the trump card in the Balkans, because the EU membership is the aspiration of all Western Balkan countries. And the EU does realize finally that there is competition which did not exist 10 years ago. The problem is that there are two problems really. One is that not all EU member states are so enthusiastic about enlargement. Yes, I take your point that you mentioned about new momentum, but let's not forget that just yesterday, I think, the opening of chapters with Northern Macedonia and Albania was blocked because one country has a bilateral problem with North Macedonia. So the problem with the EU process is that the EU, although it remains the promised land, as a problem, the promised land is always something which is very far, cannot change the road to membership, and which is a very difficult and complex road. So in the sort of more near future, I think the best approach will be the Quint. Let's not forget that that include also the United Kingdom, otherwise the United Kingdom remains outside. And UK is still a relevant European power, and it's better to have it in the tent than outside the tent. And the Berlin process. The Quint has also the great advantage of keeping the Americans in, which is another thing that Europeans, which is very important. The Berlin process is, doesn't forget, is about connectivity. Connecting Berlin process, which includes the UK, by the way, and this is the best response to the Chinese competition. But obviously, the Europeans have to step up the Balkan policy more than they've done in the last 5-6 years, because otherwise the US will feel compelled to work alone. This is like a recurring pattern in the Balkans, also in more dramatic situations when the Europeans could not do the job, then the US had to step in.
Yeah, it's like a common pattern that we have witnessed so tragically in the 1990s when Europe was not able to solve the conflicts, the bloody conflicts on the
That's what I had in mind, Florian.
All right, with this answer, thank you, Stefano. We are concluding the first round. And now let's have a question from our young leader, Jeremić from Bosnia and Herzegovina.
Hello. First of all, thank you for organizing this program. I'm Jeremić. I'm from Bosnia and Herzegovina, and I'm currently participating in the Road to Warsaw Security Forum Western Balkans program. I would like to address one question to all participants. The 70+1 initiative has been often labeled as a China's tool to divide and conquer Europe. To what extent do you agree with such a statement, and how do you think to convince small EU member states, as well as other Western Balkans countries, to look for their future in EU 27 rather than in 17+1? Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think this question would be best addressed first to Theresa, since it's touching upon the role of China.
In regard to the 17+1, we saw recently with the UN statement, 16 of the 17+1 countries remain neutral. So I think China has been very effective. And so all China needs is one member state. When there's a policy that the EU wants to promote, all they need is one member state to water it down or block it. And we've seen that happen with Greece. We've seen it happen with Hungary on multiple occasions. And so I think that this is a problem. I mean, and Brussels looks at it with great concern. They've called it a Trojan horse. It kind of woke them up and then they kind of forgot about it again. So the Chinese changed the speed on this over time. So when they raise and lower the heat, there's a lot of promise fatigue in the region. A lot of promised investments never showed up. But I think that they made these countries feel important. And they, you know, Germany, for example, has privileged relations with China, France as well. So these countries feel, well, why can't we have a special relationship with China? So it's a very tough narrative to counter. And obviously these countries do need investment.
Does anyone else to answer to that question? Maybe like a perspective from the region, Mr. Jeremić.
Well, I think that's definitely true. But you know, geopolitics isn't really charitable business. So of course that China dwarfs any single European country, even the biggest ones, let alone the small ones of Eastern Europe or the Western Balkans. And of course it's infinitely easier to deal with one or a subset of countries than with the whole European Union. But I don't really think that they're to blame. Perhaps there is European task to try and find a counter move, like in the game of chess, so that Europe presents a common front instead of letting this happen. So it is theirs to try. It is ours to see what to do about it.
Okay, we have meanwhile also collected some questions coming in through the chat function. And I would like to bring one of the questions into the discussion. Bojan Stojkovic is asking, today North Macedonia got a veto from its neighbor Bulgaria on beginning of EU accession talks. My question for the participants is, how do we move forward with these kinds of historical issues in place? And also, do such developments play in the favor of EU's rivals, China and Russia, regarding the Balkans? Robert, would you like to answer this question?
Not particularly, but you asked me. No, of course, you know, our perspective is that we would like to focus on all the positive developments. So, you know, I mentioned some strange reactions from some countries. Remember when the big issue of the name was resolved by Athens and Skopje. And now we have, you know, North Macedonia, who recently joined NATO as the 30th member. And that was something which was universally acclaimed and welcomed. But, you know, slightly different different emphasis, not as enthusiastic in Moscow, and you have to wonder about that. And that is the difference. There is no magic wand. I mean, I take the point of Mr. Jeremić that, of course, as he put it, geopolitics is not a charitable business, but equally it is the job, it is the responsibility of all the leaders of the opinion shapers, all the countries of the region, because they are not objects, they are subjects, right? To do the necessary calculations, so to speak. So when you face various hurdles, I think the bad news is that hurdles exist, okay. And not all the issues which have, let's say, plagued, if you like, or have been, the experience of the countries in the region, they've not gone away. There is no magic wand, neither on the EU side or NATO and individual countries. However, there is plenty of good examples as well. I mentioned one, but there's also, I mean, I look at things in the news. I mean, there's agreements between North Macedonia, Albania, and Serbia on fighting COVID together. There's various other initiatives which also involve the countries. Let's remember that there was a groundbreaking bilateral agreement between Bulgaria and then not yet North Macedonia, which was not actually something that was developed by outsiders. It was an agreement reached by those two countries by their own efforts. And I think this is the way to go. And the experience that we have, geopolitics, yes, it's there. But at the end of the day, people in the region, like everywhere else, have the same desires, and I think they can really calculate, if you like, what is good, what's important, the perspective of integration, to have good relations with the neighbors, with all the benefits of trade, of putting aside various, historic animosities, and the verdict on that, I think, is univocal. And frankly speaking, I also would put a sort of rhetorical question to which I think I would present the answer, which I hope other panelists would agree. There is no alternative. There is no meaningful alternative to precisely good neighbor relations, no matter how sometimes difficult they may be, and the integration perspective, because that brings in all the benefits from the point of view of standards, the rule of law, the question of, the well-working institutions. So people will not want to emigrate, etc. So in other words, yes, one can focus on some hurdles or problems which exist. They exist between countries who are members of, the institutions we've been talking about. And yet, I remain an optimist because it is the only path, and it's a logical path. It's not just a question of a romantic vision. It's a very hard-headed vision. So that's where I would put my money and my heart into.
Thank you, Robert. There's one last question, I think, by Nini Tsiklauri from the European Academy of Diplomacy. She's asking, what can the EU do to build trust in the Western Balkans region? How can the European Union overcome its lack of communication to the civil society? Stefano, would you like to answer to that question?
Sorry, can you say that again? I missed.
Yeah, so Nini Tsiklauri from the European Academy of Diplomacy, she asked, what can the EU do to build trust in the Western Balkans region? How can the European Union overcome its lack of communication to civil society? So this question of credibility and trust.
Well, I think it's not so much a matter of credibility and trust in the EU as such, because the EU, as it often happens, is most popular with countries that are members of the EU, it has to make credible the destination. People in the Western Balkans have to believe that although there are obviously hurdles, we heard from Jeremić concern about backsliding of democracy in Serbia. There's no country that does not have a problem in, and this is why the negotiating process of membership is so difficult. But the people have to believe that the EU means when they say that the membership, the door is open to membership, the EU means it. And the reason the negotiations are so complex and so difficult is because they trigger reforms in candidate countries that are necessary first to the countries themselves. I think this is the credibility, because the process is taking too long, and possibly because sort of the EU has been slack in communicating its commitment, continuing commitment to enlargement in the last few years. People have lost faith in membership, but it is, and the EU realizes that there is no other, that it is in the EU interest to have the Western Balkans in rather than out.
Okay, Mr. Jeremić, please.
I'd like to follow up on the two previous speakers with regard to the two questions. I'll be making it very, very simple. It is absolutely outrageous what is currently happening to Northern Macedonia with this another bloc. This is a country that made a very, very difficult and controversial decision to change its name in order to get closer to the EU. Then it ended up being delayed for a while. It was France and so on and so forth. Okay, we managed to overcome this obstacle. Now the Bulgarians are coming with an outrageous, like a truly outrageous demand that is insulting is the least I can say about the demand that the Northern Macedonians make an announcement that their culture and language have Bulgarian roots. I'm not a linguist, I'm not a historian, I'm not gonna put my judgment, historical, linguistical judgment on this, but politically speaking, it is just outrageous. So if the Northern Macedonia, the country that in the last couple of years made greatest strides when it comes to reform, if they're being blocked on this, then there's going to be like a dramatic message. So all the nice language about the future and the good neighborly relations and so on and so forth, I think that they're going to be hugely relativized. And there are a lot of people here in Serbia who are not supporters of the Serbian European path. I'm not amongst them, but they're these days being very loud in Serbia saying, okay, look at the Northern Macedonians. They did an outrageous thing and changed their name. Now they are asking themselves to renounce their cultural language. So guys, if you want to do something about Kosovo in order to move forward to the European future, be sure that there are going to be next demands, perhaps with regard to Bosnia or something else. Look at the Northern Macedonian example. So therefore, my wholehearted appeal on my European friends is that they give a boost to Northern Macedonian European aspirations and not stop them.
All right. Theresa, yeah, sure.
Make a quick comment about that.
A few more minutes or seconds, please go ahead.
Yesterday, a CEAS survey was released, and in Serbia, 50% of the population is interested in joining the EU, which isn't very high, actually, compared to the other Balkan countries. And 36 are against joining the EU. That's up 5% from the previous year, which was at 31%. So I think it's just a striking change. I just wanted to make that comment. I forgot to say it earlier, and it was just those, that data was just released yesterday.
Yeah, I think it was like, if I may add on that, the same poll that like found out that 80% of Serbians are opposed to NATO membership, which is not on the table, but it shows that there's still a lot of work to do to have a more positive image of NATO in Serbia, right, Robert?
Yes, but okay, yes, that's true. But in the same poll, I read it. It's good. Let's keep advertising it CAS because they deserve it. But the same poll showed that I think it was more than 60% of people in Serbia are in favor of cooperation. That's the good news with NATO.
All right. With this good news, I think we have to come to an end because unfortunately our time is up. 45 minutes is hardly enough to discuss all the issues related to the role of external actors on the Western Balkans. And I mean, of course, we omitted even some external actors such as Turkey or the United Arab Emirates. However, I think we still covered quite some ground, and I will not even try to summarize today's discussion, but if there's really one conclusion, then that there is a strong element of agency for the European Union and its transatlantic partner. Strategic rivals such as Russia and China, they use the strategic void, they use the vacuum that the West is leaving behind. And if Europe and the US stand together and engage actively together, the influence of external actors in Europe's inner courtyard can be contained. And this concludes the first day of the Road to Warsaw Security Forum. Please tune in tomorrow. Bye-bye. Thank you so much to all of you. Stay healthy.
Thank you so much, everybody. We truly appreciated this wonderful panel. And of course, hello to our great friends, those of you who have been already at the Warsaw Security Forum, Robert, Pszczel, and Theresa, and Vuk. Fantastic to see you guys. Thank you, Stefano, Stefani, for joining us. And finally, thank you, Florian, for being with us as a wonderful moderator of this panel. Before we conclude, I just wanted to share the results of the poll we have been doing among our participants. We're delighted again to stress there has been over 1,000 registered participants. On an ongoing basis, we have almost 400 people at all times. And this is the last poll for today about Western Balkans. Can we see the poll? So the question was, Albania, North Macedonia, Montenegro, and Serbia will all become the EU member states in 10 years, says 32%, 15 years, 26%, and 15 or more years, 21%. And unfortunately, 19% says it will never happen. So it seems that there's not that much optimism between our participants. Actually, I'm much more optimistic than our participants are. And I do hope that in the next decade, we will see you, Vuk, and the countries from your region as equal members of the European Union, and let's hope that this is going to happen. So thank you again to all the panelists, and we now move into the concluding remarks.